and good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. My name is Maxine Burkett. I'm a professor of law at the University of Hawaii, and I am this morning happily moderating this session on climate change in Hawaii, sort of a 2020 overview of what we know about the science and related research on climate change, and also the action that's happening on the ground in our state. It is my incredible pleasure to moderate this discussion with some pretty amazing heroes of mine in the field. We have three panelists today: Karl Kim, Dr. Victoria Keener, and Danielle Bass. First, we will hear from Dr. Karl Kim, who is a professor of urban and regional planning and executive director of the National Disaster Preparedness Training Center. The center is authorized by Congress to develop and deliver training courses for first responders, emergency managers, and underserved communities who are exposed to natural hazards. Dr. Kim was educated at Brown University and M.I.T. In addition to planning, he holds appointments in architecture in the Center for Korean Studies at the University of Hawaii and served as Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at UH. And I think most important in his bio, in spite of studying and writing about disasters, Dr. Kim remains hopelessly and unabashedly optimistic about our future. After Dr. Kim speaks, Dr. Victoria Keener will present to us some of the work that's been happening related to her research at the East West Center. She's a researcher there. She leads the Pacific RISA and was lead author of the Hawaii and Pacific Islands chapter of the 4th U.S. National Climate Assessment. Dr. Keener also serves on the City of Honolulu Climate Commission, and she earned her PhD in agricultural and biological engineering. Danielle Bass will conclude the formal presentations. She's the State of Hawaii's Sustainability Coordinator within the state's Office of Planning. She led the revision and updates of the Hawaii 2050 Sustainability Plan and is establishing the new State of Hawaii's statewide sustainability program. She's born and raised in Hawaii in Mililani and holds a master's degree in urban and regional planning, a disaster management and humanitarian assistance postgraduate degree, and a bachelor's degree in political science from UH Mānoa. She's also a graduate of the University of Cambridge's Institute for Sustainability, Leadership, Business, Sustainability Management program. You'll have to say more about what we mean by sustainability, Danielle, as your bio is replete with the term, and I know it has its various incarnations. So we're looking forward to hearing from you about that. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Kim to present on science, social science, and climate disasters.
Yeah, thank you, Maxine. You know, I think like you, I love my job because I get to work with so many bright and committed and motivated young people, and so that's why I'm optimistic about the future. And I'm also really honored to be on this panel with you and Victoria and Danielle. You're all doing such important, great, innovative, and really needed work for Hawaii and our planet. Yeah, I titled my talk for this 8 minutes, Climate Change Impacts in Hawaii, Layer Cakes, Sunsets, and many Ds. And Ds stand for disasters, death and destruction, but also democracy and diplomacy and doing good things. These changes that are occurring in our atmosphere, in our ocean, the sea surface temperature, the thermal expansion, the global warming, which has contributed to sea level rise and affects all these atmospheric processes, the circulation, the trade winds, the jet streams, the monsoons, the moisture and humidity, the clouds and thunderstorms, rainfall, and all the exchanges of heat and energy. These are all affected and changing because of human actions. And sea level rise really threatens the loss of our beaches and our lands, especially here in Hawaii. Another way to think about this is the atmosphere is like our big security blanket. It not only provides the air we breathe, but also protects us from excessive radiation. And we haven't been taking care of the atmosphere. I mean, we're continuing to dump pollutants and pump greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And we're also killing off rainforests and destroying natural areas, which trap and store CO2 further exacerbating the problems. Okay, now this brings me to the last part of my talk, which is on D's, big D's, little D's, bad D's, Donald's, but also some good ones. And so here's a partial list of some of the D's I came up with. We are stratified in terms of wealth, opportunity, justice, class, and race. This is so apparent with a pandemic. Where it is spread, who has died, who gets tested, who gets treatment, advanced treatments and care, and then who gets blamed or ignored and profits from this disease. It is connected to the protests and civil unrest because of the structural, systemic stratification and layer caking and racism in our society. We have to see these connections between society and climate and justice. The spread of disease and virus from animals to people is partly because of our mismanagement of the WUI, that's the wildlife-urban interface. But it's also because of the systemic structural causes and consequences of disasters. That, along with the racist statements and actions, need to be called out and stopped. You know, on the continent, there's been an increase in hate crimes against Asians and Asian Americans. I mean, it's when our leaders call the virus the China virus or the Kung Fu virus. It shows what's so deeply wrong in our society.
I'm going to get a little more specific in my time today and talk about what the role of climate science is specifically in informing local decision-making and policy with some examples from my research. So the Pacific RISA is a NOAA-funded research grant that I lead, the Pacific Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessments. We're interdisciplinary. We co-produce projects with stakeholders across the Hawaii and Pacific Islands region that help transform climate science into policy and management. So we're very collaborative. Maxine has been one of our PIs and partners for years, and we have a lot of partners in different organizations and governments and communities throughout the region. And that's how we're able to be effective as a boundary organization. So this matrix shows these functions as identified by stakeholders of the Pacific RISA that they see that the climate boundary organization serving for them. So in terms of being supportive, this means that Pacific RISA supports the advancement of policy and management solutions and the creation of political will. So in this example I'm going to talk about, we supported Maui County in integrating climate considerations into their mandatory water use development plan update, bringing together over 100 county, state, NGO, and private stakeholders to develop 4 future land use scenarios that were run through both a climate and a water budget model. So our base question going into the project was saying, what are the impacts of climate and land cover change on groundwater management? Part of this project was also motivated by wanting to work with different regulators to include climate in plans that were being updated anyway. And so it kind of was a nice mesh between both state and county regulations in this project to integrate both climate, land use, and water use change over that time. So at the state level, we had Act 286, which was the climate change adaptation priority guidelines, which were signed into law. And at the county level, this meshes with the water use and development plans, which are guidelines that that talk about frameworks to manage water resources over the next 20-year period and allocate water for growth across the different counties. And for the first time, they were asked to incorporate climate change under that state regulation. So that's where we came in. So finally, just to end up, I wanted to focus again on how climate boundary organizations can really be a critical tool in transforming science into local implementation. And they can serve in meeting these 4 needs for stakeholders: being responsive, being generative, being supportive, and being critical of policy. And so by working with a boundary organization or embracing these principles, it's a good framework for Hawaii to increase equitable adaptation to climate change and increase our climate resilience. Mahalo.
Great, thank you so much, Vicki, Dr. Keener. Danielle, can you say more about the state of Hawaii writ large and its plan with respect to sustainability, but particularly climate adaptation?
Aloha, everyone. My name is Danielle Bass. I'm the State of Hawaii Sustainability Coordinator. And I want to thank Dr. Burkett, Kim, and Keener here, because I do believe that much of the climate science, as well as our academic publications, have informed many of our local and state policies over the last few decades. So in terms of our proactive sustainability and climate policies, statutory targets, goals, and planning. A month ago, there was a newly created statewide sustainability program. Our office is providing a sustainability plan update. If many of you recall from the 2008 time period when that was previously published, we'll be going over our state statutory targets and non-legal goals and initiatives, as well as our climate adaptation planning efforts. So recently, as I mentioned, just a few weeks ago, in fact, I believe it was September 15th, the governor signed into law Act 45, Session Laws of Hawaii 2020, and it actually updated the State Office of Planning's roles and responsibilities, which is a great win. And in terms of climate and sustainability and sustainability planning. First, this law provides sea level rise adaptation coordination via the CZM, Coastal Zone Management Program. It requires the Office of Planning to provide statewide climate adaptation, sustainability planning, and coordination. It requires the Office of Planning to serve as a policy office to provide policy guidance, planning, and assistance to state and county agencies in terms of climate change, sustainability, and resilience. And it officially establishes our statewide sustainability program. So the statewide sustainability program, newly established and introducing. This program will develop and organize and promote policies and programs to assist our sustainability and climate adaptation planning efforts. It'll identify, evaluate, and make recommendations regarding proposed legislation, regulatory changes with our PUC and Land Use Commission, policy modifications with the governor, the legislature, other government agencies, private entities, and non-governmental organizations as needed. And it'll also develop and promote proposals that jointly and mutually enhance our local communities here in Hawaii, the environment, community well-being for the present and future benefit of the people of Hawaii. So right now, what we're doing in the Office of Planning is we're updating the Hawaii 2050 Sustainability Plan onto the local food production goals. We have now a law to require doubling the local food production here in Hawaii to be achieved by the year 2030. So this requirement is set on the Department of Agriculture in partnership with the governor's office to double food production and increase food exports by the year 2030. I'm happy to share that in a recent meeting, the Department of Agriculture is actually putting together that strategic action plan. And we do expect this to be shared by the end of this year. We also have many 2035 statutory targets, which requires our entire University of Hawaii campus system, as well as the entire Department of Education campus system to be net zero in energy use by the year 2030.
Karl, I want to go back quickly to your presentation. And as you can tell, I really liked the use of the Ds. And the question I have is about bridging data with the doing. And I want to sort of tease out, I mean, you made reference to a few of those things, and certainly in your presentation, recognizing that data is not enough. At least we're not seeing it bridge in the data on COVID, and certainly not the copious data we have on the state of the climate. And then there's the doing, but the doing something, anything. Can you say a little bit more about what you've learned in your work with disasters, about how to galvanize the doing of something? And I just want to affirm that I think some of it is doing less, right? Depending on the context. But can you talk a little bit more about that connection?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think really important to our understanding of hazards and risks and what to do about it. Because without good data, without open data, without access to data, without transparency in data, I think, often they say one of the first casualties in a big disaster is data. And we see this with the pandemic, and there's all kinds of reasons and excuses, that we're trying to protect sensitive and confidential information. Yes, we recognize that. But there are these other problems about who owns the data, who has access to the data, how is the data going to be used?
But I'm going to ask a similar question, Victoria, to you, because the use of data to inform decisions is a big part of what you do. And I wonder about the serving as a conduit and how you're able to also use data coming from the community to inform the work that you're doing, right? So how does that work in terms for boundary organizations in gathering the data and ensuring meaningful participation? Can you say a little bit more about that?
And so it's not enough just to say, here are 3 terabytes of data of, every single layer in the atmosphere and the temperature over the next 100 years, have at it. Because a lot of people, that's not accessible to a lot of people. So how do we transform that into something that is usable? And that's what we try and do in the Pacific RESA program, and kind of what I tried to show in that Maui groundwater project is taking that data and running it through a couple models that are becoming increasingly more transparent to people from what the outcomes mean, and then tying it to stakeholder input, really shaping and including them in that development of the research questions.
We're sort of at a low, right, in terms of the current state of the economy and the prognosis in the near term. How are those considerations in terms of the damage to the economy being taken into account with respect to the pandemic? And I want to ask this question also in a forward-looking way, which is to say, are there opportunities as well, given the hit that we're taking as a state?
Thank you for that question. There are so many plans and policies that are directing our future development and where we want to go for a sustainable and climate resilient future. And absolutely, as the state of Hawaii is going through this global pandemic and our economic recovery, as well as our social recovery, which is not often addressed. This is something that we're all actually collaborating on throughout, state government and through our state agencies, where, we work with our partners and collaborate. For instance, my office at the Office of Planning, we're working really well with the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency as they develop their recovery plans through the State Disaster Recovery Coordination that they're launching. That when they develop those plans, they align that with our climate resilience and our sustainability goals.
I think that we need to really focus on many of the initiatives, both short-term and longer term, for addressing the pandemic, but also addressing the environment. And there are these linkages between the economy, the environment, and how we do business. I think this is an opportunity to do a reset in terms of the way we've been developing, how we've been developing, the areas that we're developing. We've been forced to slow down and consider what an economy looks like without tourism. And I think, unfortunately, rather than just rushing back to just do what we had before, which I understand and I kind of get because of the trauma that's out in the community, we do need to invest more into things that are really sustainable, that won't be struck by the same kinds of hazards or threats that we're talking about. And so I'd like to just see much more investment in green infrastructure, green development as part of the solution to the problems that we're facing right now. but I think we should also recognize the good intentions and recognize really the aloha and the sacrifices, not just of our frontline people, the doctors and nurses, but actually our government officials and those people who are really stepping forward in these hard, difficult, challenging times to try to do the right thing. And so that's kind of what I would have to say, to the students and to the others that I work with. And again, I have to apologize because sometimes I say things that are more on the critical side, but it's meant to start the discussion. So, make sure that we have the checks and balances in place. And so, but again, thank you again for inviting us.
Thank you, and know that your enthusiasm more than makes up for anything that you think may sound too overly critical. I personally find all of your courage in the work that you do a great source of hope, and I'm so grateful for the time that you took this morning to help set the stage for what I think will be rich discussions throughout the weekend at the rest of the festival. Thank you again. Happy Saturday, and take very good care.